Okay. You guys ready?
Yeah. Marhaba. Thank you for hosting us.
It's a pleasure to be a guest.
What's the name of the show? So we can plug it.
I don't know what you want to call it.
Polyperspective Beirut Banyan.
Wow.
How about we don't do that? That should be the
Oh,
Ralph
yeah.
Baydoun show.
The Ralph Baydoun show.
I mean, let's not make it a thing. I hope this is not a thing. But the purpose of this is to actually give you a chance to respond to some of the arguments I have received in the past year. Arguments about the need for resistance, the need for Hezbollah. And I feel I've been doing a lot of research, a lot of readings. I've been receiving those comments, and I know how to answer most of them, but we never have the chance to discuss it in a professional setup.
And this is professional. Thank you.
I mean,
appreciate that.
like we're all.
Thank you.
I think you both are thought leaders, and I think you don't have. I never saw you guys answering those arguments, because those are academic arguments and scientific arguments, like
Yes.
quotes from Israeli books and authors. So I would like us to actually delve into those questions. How do you feel about that?
Ralph, I'm honored to be on your show. It's easy for me because I'm not late to my own show in my own home, and I'm not late to your show at my home.
5 minutes. It was 5 minutes.
Win-win, yeah. It's an honor to talk to you in any way, so I'm happy to be challenged.
Thank you, Ronnie.
I think this is a good idea. I think it's a good exercise. A lot of this war has been fought on the ground, but also in the narrative realm. So I think this is where we do most of our contribution. Let's see. Yalla, throw your best punches.
Cool. So I'm going to start with a quote by Chaim Weizmann, the first Israeli president.
Chaim,
Chaim, yes.
we need to
just
speak.
read it.
Hey,
Yeah,
if
Chaim
we're going to
Weizmann.
be
Have you been,
agents tonight. We have to get.
Have you been getting trained?
I prepared.
Okay, so he says, I have seen Palestine all the way up to the Litani River. So how do you comfort people living in the south when the first president of this state said this, and it was written in so many books and so many studies about the importance of the Litani River on a strategic defensive and also a material interest for the Zionist entity, like the water, and how do you respond to that?
Wardini.
That's your response is ready. When was this? How many years ago?
1948,
Okay.
49.
It's very interesting. No, that period of time, I think a lot of national governments around the region also had expansionist ambitions. And if we're going to look in history, we need to not be selective. So this is a time where there was projects for many countries to expand, even further into the future. Actually, I will give credit to Ronnie for telling me this. Lebanon is part of many greater projects. It's part of Greater Israel, supposedly. It's part of Greater Syria. There's a political party in Lebanon, اسمه حزب البعث, حزب القومي السوري, who also thinks Lebanon should be part of Greater Syria, and also Cyprus. I don't think Cyprus is arming itself to defend from, Syrian ambitions. I also think that the strategic necessities 70 years ago changed, and the possibilities changed. Maybe back then Lebanon was still a very small, very young state. It could have been possible to envision a future where borders change. 100 years later, I think things have fixated. So I don't think. I think they can make ambitions at the time. I would love to look at what other leaders were also saying around us. I think the only as Ronnie told me once, the only greater project that prevailed is Greater Lebanon من وقت لهلا. So, and even if, let's say, they do have these interests, then I think we should gear our defensive strategy on how to not lure them into a situation where they actually have access to to enter Lebanon. So if they are actually still pursuing that interest very seriously, then I think our duty is to make sure that there is no the war you win is the one you don't fight. So let's not even create a war with them. So they don't have to come occupy us. It's a very simple.
So you're saying let's make peace with the Israelis?
Just talk inside. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, if peace is the absence of war, then let's have peace. Let's make peace. Let's have peace. If peace is عم نحكي political sense إنه let's normalize or whatever, I don't think that's my call to make, and I don't think we need to go that far just to protect ourselves. If the objective is to protect ourselves, let's have an absence of war. If the absence of war is peace, of course, I don't think anyone should be shamed for wanting peace.
But how do you achieve peace? It's like some call this idea of peace, the idea of the army, on the borders. They call it glorified border guard for Israel. We want the Lebanese army to be a glorified border guard. What do you say to that?
I don't say anything. I don't know what that means. I think it's a waste of energy.
Even Hezbollah's cleric, I don't know what's his name. Sorry, he said that all the armies in the region serve just to protect. Their duty is to protect. Their mandate is to protect Israel.
I mean, I don't know how they look at things, because to them, this is how they define victory. So I think they have a very distorted version of understanding of. I don't think we should take, after this experience, I don't think we should take seriously anymore their definition of defense and victory and war and peace. لأنه it's a failed model, it's a collapsed model, it's very obsolete. But also because we're talking about armies that serve the interest of other states. Let's look, since you're quoting, let's look at some of the quotes made by, in much more recent history, by some of the Iranian leaderships, who described Hezbollah as being one of their deterrence armies in the region. So I think we cannot be very selective. إذا عن جد في deterrence happening, إذا عن جد هن بيعتبروا إنه there's an army that can serve as deterrence to another state, I think that also applies to them.
What do you feel about that?
I'll give you a silly example, and I'll give you a serious example. I'll start with the silly. 25 years ago or so, I was in Hungary, late at night. I was younger and I was drunk, and it was cold, and it was snowing. And I went out with Hungarians to some beer hall, and they got very drunk, and they started singing songs that, in retrospect, are probably not considered cosmopolitan. Ultranationalist, probably anti-Roma, anti-Gypsy, and something about Hungary that was once great. And the woman that I was walking with, my friend of the night, she, with her finger, went on a car window to explain to me what she meant by the song. And she drew this insane map, which included Slovakia, parts of Romania, I think parts of Ukraine, and more than Hungary. And she's like, that's Hungary. And her drunken stupor, with her iced finger, she showed me Hungary. It was maybe 3 times bigger than it should be. And I could see what she was trying to tell me, that Hungary, in its ultra-nationalism, is bigger. And maybe part of it is stolen in her mind. And what is left of Hungary is not good enough at 3 a.m. when you're drunk. But 3 p.m, I don't think she's ever doing that. So that's the silly example, in that many countries have ideas that fall flat. The second example, which is the more serious one, I think even today there's a few hundred Israelis on a Facebook group that are building settlements in South Lebanon, and they have a graphic designer.
That's right.
I mean, there are more people on Facebook that believe Tupac Shakur is alive. There are more people, including relatives of mine, that think Princess Diana is alive too. And I think there's 1 million, or maybe more than 1 million people that think the world is flat. And they have seminars to prove that if you walk too far, you fall. So yeah, I mean, maybe an Israeli leader suggested that Israel could reach areas that it's not in right now.
80 years ago. Come in.
Even if it was earlier than that or later, there can be Israelis today that say things that don't really add up to reality. The borders were drawn in the 1940s.
Right.
And the existence of Israel since then, to my knowledge, has not gone further than the armistice line. Whether or not they have occupied, and how far north they have occupied, and even the last stretch of our lives, there have been Israeli soldiers in the south, that they would consider that part of Israel today, I think it amounts to very little to be worried about. On the other side, what they have done on the Syrian front is actually annex territory through war, the Golan Heights, and our Shabaa farms, or the Syrian Shabaa farms, in the process. That, as a consequence of war in the 1960s, and I think they annexed in 1981. The only 3 or 4 countries that recognize that are the US recently, Israel, more recent than Israel, I mean, and maybe some islands, the Marshall Islands, maybe, too. So even on an international level, despite American acceptance of that, it's not internationally recognized. And that's also important. And you can go even further. Up until now, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem are not considered Israel too.
Yeah, but they're going to change that. They have the opportunity right now to annex the West Bank, and they're heading in that direction.
Right, and that goes back to the guy you mentioned at the beginning, our
Weizmann.
Chaim Weizmann, whatever. Yeah, Zionism and Zion seems to inherit mandate Palestine and not Lebanon.
Yeah, but listen, so first of all, I have 2 questions.
Yes.
Don't you worry that those people with fairy tales are becoming the majority in Israel? And if they are becoming the majority, this fascist, so Israel has been electing, the people in Israel have been electing democratically more and more right-wing governments. So don't you fear that this evolution, if this pattern goes on, we're gonna go get to a point where they will actually establish settlements on our land, or they will seek this. They will seek the Litani River. So, for example, there's a quote here from a book called The Unforgettable Litani, The Litani River in Zionist and Israeli Water Strategy, 1881-1956. And this is the excerpt. For example, in the autumn of 1935, Weizmann held talks and corresponded with French industrialist Gabriel Arnault, who was interested in establishing a Jewish settlement company in Syria and Lebanon. According to Weizmann, the problem was the French and Lebanese. The problem was the French and the Lebanese. So pending their consent, he suggested buying land near the coast between Beirut and the Palestinian border. In the following winter, Weizmann exchanged letters with the Lebanese journalist Ep.410, who assisted him by finding land that could be purchased. The efforts turned out to be futile as the French High Commissioner of Syria rejected any Jewish undertakings in his domain. So this is a quote from, since 1881.
I'll take it to the other extreme.
But people believe that. Israelis, they take these words as, something that needs to be achieved.
I'll take it to the absolute extreme. Lebanon has been viciously invaded more than once and occupied. And in that course of history, not one Israeli settlement ever appeared in Lebanon. So that's one extreme. And that even with all the bloodshed and the recent round and the 1980s and the 2000s and the 90s and whatever, going back to the 70s when the first Israeli invasion happened, there's never been an Israeli settlement built in Lebanon. The other extreme is that the settlements that were built outside of Israel's borders were dismantled by one of the most vicious Israeli leaders, Ariel Sharon. So Ariel Sharon and the Gaza Strip withdrew and dismantled settlements there, and the settlements built in the Sinai in Egypt post-1967 were all dismantled too. And I think it's, 1973, that little window, 6 years, those Israeli settlements disappeared. So that's the extreme conclusion, I think, that Israel doesn't doesn't really concern itself, I think, with public opinion. It may build settlements and remove them. In Lebanon's history with Israel, not one settlement has ever appeared. So even if there's a right-wing government today, I mean, there was a right-wing government in the 80s too, the right-wing Israeli appetite to build settlements in Lebanon, I don't see it going beyond fringe voices. But that's the way I've read this issue, and I know a lot of people share it online.
And what did you feel about this historian that was killed in Shama recently? This
The archaeologist who was looking for evidence. Well, I think he found what he was looking for. But I was going to say something. 5 days ago, Trump suggested that Canada should become the 51st American state. And 5 years ago, he wanted to buy Greenland. But I mean, those things like happen. But if you just look at certain examples in history and extract them from their context, no, it's easy to build, it's easy to like nourish your fears if you just selectively look at examples that confirm your worst nightmare. But the world and the history and everything is so much broader than the 50 books even you read, even if that's how far you're into the research. I feel like a lot of people are just, even if نفس الشيء اللي what happens with news, a lot of people look for news that confirm what they already believe. I think a lot of people look for in history for evidence that already comforts their fears and anxieties and concerns, rather than things that maybe ease them a little bit or make them look elsewhere. So personally, I think because I never got into that trip, let's call it that, I'm not very afraid of things like this ever materializing. But let's say they are. Let's say they do. I think the biggest guarantee that Lebanon could never be occupied easily is if it was an actually very strong and capable state and had very strong diplomatic ties, and countries would jump in. Let's say in a crazy hypothetical world where actually Israel decides to unilaterally start a war that is without any justification, and they start rolling their tanks in and they start trying to depopulate South Lebanon. I think we've never been in a more vulnerable position to defend against such a hypothetical than we are today, as a consequence of the systemic mismanagement that has happened in this country for the past 20 years. So let's say
what does that mean?
I'm trying to figure out. I'm also digging for answers. But so let's say
that's called insider trading.
Inside joke. So let's say these people's fears are genuine and serious. I would invite them to think of a future for Lebanon where we're not susceptible enough for this to happen the way they think it will happen.
I'll add something though. This should not discount that the Israelis can push Lebanese out of the south. So it's not like the Israelis can create buffer zones, and they did that for 18 years. The Israelis had a de facto strip that they occupied and mismanaged in the south, with Lebanese living there, and Israeli soldiers among them, and pro-Israel militia too, and Hezbollah, and UNIFIL. They can do that. But that's, I think, due to war, not due to annexation dreams, or that this is ours biblically, or whatever quotes certain people float around.
It's for security, not for expansion.
That even in those decades, they did not seek what was very easy to do. And I don't think they would do it if it's more difficult, and they haven't done it.
But I think, like, if we again,
I fear this becomes and I don't want to overstep now, maybe we're jumping, that this becomes we need to have a resistance group, because that's what the Israelis want to do always. They want to build settlements in the south. Therefore, it's a permanent justification for something like a resistance group.
But these are legitimate concerns, especially when you have a state that is built on ideology. Okay, so if you want to so Hezbollah is also a kind of copying the Israeli mentality. Like they both are fighting ideological wars, but when people in the south, living in the south, they are
What do you mean by ideological wars?
I mean, Hezbollah believes that they need to liberate Jerusalem for religious ideological reasons, and Israel believes that like they slaughtered red cows in Jerusalem for their Messiah to come.
No, I meant in their wars with each other. What is ideological about their war that they fought?
Like in Hezbollah's Hamas, when they publish like the first sentence in any statement is أعد لهم ما يعني شو هي الجملة؟ أعد لهم ما استطعتم من قوة. يعني آية يعني بحط لك آية. They start every statement with a verse from the Quran.
Yeah. But
تقاتلونهم خلف حصون عرفت كيف يعني it's and on the other side also like if you follow Israeli Telegram pages they also refer to the Hebrew Bible and you also like we also see this emblem on the
قرب بس على الميكروفون sorry
on some Israeli
the
Greater Israel from Egypt to Saudi Arabia to Lebanon.
Good luck with that.
So yeah, I know, but are these not legitimate concerns by people, and how to comfort people? Like, how do you convince them that these are the fringes of Israeli society, not all of them? And also the comparison between the south of Lebanon, their invasion in '82. The structure of Israeli society was different. They were mostly socialist. Right now, it's more right-wing.
82, their only convicted politician at that moment in time who was prevented from returning to politics is, I think, considered the most right-wing of Israeli figures, Ariel Sharon. So that's a very right-wing and a very far more brutal attack against Lebanon. But trying to convince people about existential fears, I can't match that with policy making. That might be more a psychological story. In other words, maybe there's a group of Israelis that dream about doing this, and they're on the Hezbollah side. Maybe they're referring to God in their struggle. But at the end of the day, our generation, Hezbollah did not fight Israel. Hezbollah
17 years.
Actually, from August 14, 2006 until October 6, 2024. That's a group that may have ideological, maybe part of it is ideological, but they did not fight the Israelis. And the Israelis did not fight Lebanon, as in terms of what we ended up having on October 8. So I don't know if that's good enough reason to make people paranoid that the Israelis want to build settlements. I don't see it.
I agree with Ronnie. It's very difficult to reason with paranoia and with its existential fears, and I think it's an unfair ask. يعني تطلب من حدا إنه how do you comfort someone's genuine fears? I think if your genuine fears are going to discount mine, then they're not very legitimate anymore. So let's say if you have genuine fears that the Israelis want to expand into Lebanon and have aspirations in Lebanon, and you're trying to silence me when I express my genuine fears, and but there are other forces at play here, and it's not just the Israelis, and there are more projects and aspirations around us, and you want to silence me as well, then I don't think I can speak to you. But if we want to speak honestly with each other, we can sit on a table. I can tell you what makes me worried, you can tell me what makes you worried, and we can find a way where we're both preventing that from happening. But so long as your fears are about discounting mine, I don't think there's anything I can say to reason with you. That's the problem.
And thinking of the most rational, peaceful way to prevent Israelis from crossing the border for any reason seems to me more of a logical argument than every day we have to worry that there's going to be an Israeli settlement built in the south, especially when, since British Palestine, forget Israel, the last 100 and odd years, there hasn't been one building built on our side of the border.
Okay, so that's the argument. That the fact that they didn't have any settlement built here is.
I won't discount people that love maps. You can always find a map that shows something else, and maybe map experts
Enthusiasts.
maybe map enthusiasts have their way of drawing out material from one book, from but that to me is not the story. That's an interesting footnote.
Can I add something? I was on the phone 2 days ago with a friend of mine who lost their home in one of the last strikes near Shia. And this friend of mine is a Shia, and she said something very interesting on the phone. She seems to accept all of these paranoid fears that Israel is an existential threat, but at the same time she said, "أنا ولا مرة كنت بدي أصلي بالقدس. I never wanted to go to reach Jerusalem."
Yeah,
so I think
absolutely.
even people who are afraid of Israel, there's a big stretch to say that everyone who's concerned of Israel is also accepting of the idea of resistance. I think a lot of these people think we can separate these two things from each other. You can have concerns and fears and paranoia toward Israel. That's fine, so long as it doesn't make us dysfunctional. It's okay. I don't want to convince you that these fears should not be should not make you stay up at night. If you want to stay up at night thinking about what the Israelis won't, do it. But as long as that doesn't make us dysfunctional as a state, ما خصني. When it does start to make us dysfunctional as a state, I think is when I can have an opinion about it. So if you wanna have negative sentiments towards Israel, but you also want a strong Lebanese state as a model to govern and defend, by all means, have your hobbies, have your concerns, read whatever books you want. But to use that to justify something that makes us even weaker, something that should scare us even more, that's when I have a problem with it. So I don't think the mission should be how to convince people that Israel is not a threat. I think it's how to convince people that there's a better way to protect ourselves from that threat.
Some people will tell you in 82 and maybe a week, Israel reached Beirut. Right now, they tried for 60 days and they couldn't occupy the Khiem.
They never said that they wanted to reach Beirut. Okay. I hope my words express. I hope I can express myself.
But you know what I mean. I mean,
Yes,
like
yes.
they see this ideological force
Yes.
protecting Lebanon as opposed to weakening the state. And they tell you no, Lebanon was weak before, and the proof is that they reached Beirut in 4 days.
I'll just jump in.
Please.
Just for the sake of argument, the quietest time on our border was when there was no resistance. It's the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. The quietest chapter of Lebanon's history, Ma Israel, Palestine, with the British mandate too, and the French mandate, is a time that there's no resistance. So just taking that as a measure of the quietest chapter, and no militia, and no settlements being built. I take that as the model, that seems to work. And I don't know if discounting that is an excuse. When you discount that, it's almost like ignoring, really, the years of Lebanon that functioned enough. Wasn't fantastic, but it worked to a degree. That, I think, is a mistake. I do sense, though, the paranoia, the black hole of Israel, I think is also part of the story, in that it's been over 50 years of constant war in Lebanon. It almost becomes irrational fear. And then suddenly the motive is, but okay, they're quoting now the Torah or the Quran, and that's thousands of years. I mean, that's such a slippery slope into, it's almost like Armageddon is the end of the story. So
It's a very epic saga.
Yeah.
And we seem to be in the center of the universe always.
But I'm willing to change my mind if that became a serious consideration, that the Israelis are even suggesting it in an official capacity today. The most extreme ministers of Israel, I think one of them attended one of those fringe group meetings once. Maybe it was Ben Gvir.
Ben Gvir or Smotrich, they're both from the same school.
Yeah, and even then, it's not happening. Israel seems to be dictating all the security arrangements right now in Lebanon. We can get into that maybe later. But under these epic circumstances, when they've pretty much gotten everything they wanted, They're not building settlements.
You know, like back to your argument about the relative stability that we had on the borders with Palestine and Israel. Actually, there has been some incidents where Israel committed massacres on the borders. So during the Nakba, there was a massacre. Also, I don't know the exact dates or names of the towns, but there was a few. So the people who use this argument tell you that Israel is the problem, not اتفاق القاهرة, for instance, the Cairo Agreement that allowed Palestinian resistance to use our land.
Yeah.
And I feel
Palestinian resistance to use our land, maybe half of that is correct. Fatah is not Palestinian resistance. I mean, that's also, that's accepting an ideological side that Arafat and Lebanon is resistance.
Interesting, yeah.
That's not, I would think of that as something else. I mean, that's how I read the newspaper print behind you too. I don't see that as Palestinian resistance in Lebanon.
Totally. But yeah, I'm thinking.
Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
No.
There have been killings. That's true. There have been. Yeah.
So the argument is Israel is the problem, and we need to cleanse the region from this cancer that is Israel.
Yeah.
Okay. And I feel this is related to the lack of belonging to this Lebanon, to this state. And I'll go back to what Alfred Riesche wrote, لبنان وطن نهائي لجميع أبنائه. So why did he need to say it? I know you don't see in the French institution. They said like France is, the final.
You never had to assert it.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel there's a group of Lebanese people who don't think Lebanon is the final destination, and they need to have bigger projects. How do we what do we do about that?
Ronnie, can I jump in?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not being
moderator. But Anna, I should be like you. I should always have every episode. This makes it so much easier.
The listeners are going to hate this.
No, they're not going to hear it on this one.
Oh, they're not going to hear it?
We'll see later. Yeah.
No.
One way to find out. I'm gonna go back to Khiyam. You said they weren't able to get past Khiyam. Okay, if we're gonna pick examples from the border, let's compare Khiyam and Ramesh. Let's just stay within the same time frame. Even though I really don't like to entertain these arguments because I feel like they are futile and never ending. But again, it's just a reminder not to look at things selectively. Look at the full picture. So we're gonna look at the full pictures. Ramesh is a model of a border town that could have been leveled to the ground, and it wasn't. Okay, so let's start there. Second of all, I think you said something very important. Some people in Lebanon, you didn't say it, but that's how I would say it. That's how I would describe it. They hate Israel more than they love this country. So I think on that, I think okay, Israel is the problem type. Let's talk about this. I don't think anyone in this country would have picked its current neighbors have we been asked. ما حدا سألنا, do you want Bashar al-Assad and Israel to be your neighbors? Nobody asked. Okay. Had they asked us, we would not have picked them. But these are the cards we are dealt. If we're going to spend the next century...
if you need the charger, come in, let me know.
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
So nobody asked us فينا نشيل هالشقفة. Nobody asked us if these...
فينا, as if he's... فينا نشيل هالشقفة.
That's a polite suggestion that you should.
The editor. Please. والله. Yeah.
So I'm gonna give a silly example. Speaking of silly, I'm gonna give a silly example like the one Ronnie said about his story in Hungary. And by the way, your friend for the night, it's called a date. Okay.
No, there was no transaction. It was yeah.
So just take like a cliche phrase. No, you don't choose what happens to you, but you choose how you react to it. So نحن in this country, we don't choose who our neighbors are, but we have been choosing how to react for it. And I think the past 100 years should have sent a clear signal, and we've been making the wrong choice on how to react to it. So maybe I think it's time. Again, it's not about reshifting our perception toward Israel. Keep your perceptions, keep your threats, but maybe it's about time to think of a new way to deal with this. So that's what I would say. I think, and as an answer to your previous question, we would not have picked these people to be our neighbors if we were asked, but they are. So, and I don't care how we got here. I care how we move forward. So that's my answer.
I want to get back to the original point, which was that there's a
Bigger project.
yeah, and you said you have to remove it, right? This
Cancer.
cancer, yeah. Type. Let's just say that is how they see it. I believe in free expression. They should be allowed to even explain their cause, but not at the detriment to what is actually a functioning state that we inherited in modern history, and it shouldn't be in the way of generations of prosperity. Period. That's not a good enough reason to throw away what was okay. I don't see that as necessarily destroying something that in my mind is okay, which is how Lebanon found itself in modern history. That seems more like the fact that Lebanon exists is a problem. And sometimes that comes up in different ways. Maybe it's not said so straightforward, but there's no cause that should destroy another country's well-being, no matter how morally justified it is. But supporting it in ways that don't hurt the country, that's great. I'll quote, lots of the Lebanese cultural expression is very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. And I think even the Palestinians themselves, an intelligentsia, they don't hate Lebanon. A lot of Palestinians lived here. A lot of Palestinian leaders studied here. Yeah. A Palestinian Prime Minister, Salam Fayyad, studied at AUB. You don't want that kind of person losing that opportunity by throwing Lebanon away. A fairly decent Palestinian Prime Minister benefited from having a Lebanon pre-1975. So I don't think you should throw away Lebanon just because Palestinians were dealt a huge injustice in their history.
You know, the counter-argument for that is some people in the pro-resistance people, they tell you Lebanon through them. Lebanon did not actually, they did not see the state in the south. They were abandoned by the state. They were not defended by the state. And the only people who defended them and who gave them their worth were Hezbollah and this religious party.
I think I've heard that excuse thrown back to the 60s too. The poorest parts of the country were the north back then, and that borders Syria and may have been a population that was upset with the state. That still doesn't require the dismantlement of Lebanon. And you know what? The Lebanese state, as we've understood it since the 70s, has been primarily a security-oriented thing. It's not a Lebanese state. It's an expression of whether Assad can survive in this country, how far the Israelis want to go, depending on the war. And more recently, it had nothing to do with Lebanon. I disagree with the premise that resistance even is worthy of in this country. It's not. The last decades of Lebanon have been thrown away to a miserable axis that only until recently has suffered, and we're seeing it happen in real time. That's not Lebanon. Lebanon did not even in any meaningful way participate in the last war between Iran and Israel in this country. Lebanon did not participate. And if you actually, I don't know if you can measure this right now, I would put a lot of money on this. Most Lebanese in the south that respected resistance, or still do, didn't want this war to happen.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah,
so
nobody signed up for this.
Yeah, but they accepted it. They accepted it, and they also, like you hear a lot, that they are willing to sacrifice. They are willing to sacrifice because it's a community thing.
I think it's a psychological coping mechanism. I don't think it's a rational choice. I think it's easy to accept things that ما في alternatives for. So if you tell me, جورج ما في عشاء اليوم وزربتني بالأوضة, بقول لك, okay, you know what, I accept. I didn't accept, you didn't leave me a choice.
Yeah.
It's like telling someone, you're fired, and it's like, no, I quit. No, you're fired. You have no choice. So I don't think we can fairly know if someone accepts something so long that they didn't choose it over something else. ما في alternative for them to choose any other option. So I don't think the word accept is fair. لأنه I don't think they accepted it. And the people who go as far as to say we're willing to sacrifice, I think that's better explained by a psychologist, but that's definitely a coping mechanism. It's a way to accept that there's no better thing out there for you, so you just submit to what you have been done. But something I
And
want to
also,
say,
but sorry, given the two choices of either being the front line for the war against Zionism, which I think is what you're describing, or being the front line and trying to preserve a decent country in the Middle East like Lebanon. We've lived through what it's like to be the front line. We've half a century of Lebanese history. We've been the front line. That's a huge price to pay, and I don't think it's worth it. The other model is when most of us, not all of us, most of us actually yearn for, and it's our grandparents' generation mostly, that celebrate. So I would rather have more of that than being constant war for the sake of something that doesn't really help Lebanon one bit.
I want to also talk about something you mentioned earlier, which is the relationship between the centralized Lebanese state and the people living further away from the center of power, or Beirut.
Fix your filters, wait, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
That almost went very badly. I felt the table near the end.
The weight loss
Yeah.
isn't working.
Okay, that's a conversation about system of governance, but you cannot use it as an excuse to justify an even worse outcome. Okay, so the state hates us, so we're gonna hate it back, or the state rejected us, now we're going to reject it. If أكيد there are أكيد the governing system for Lebanon doesn't cater for its people. But that's a conversation when you use that as your opening statement, that should take us to conversation about, okay, what kind of governing system should we work towards? It has nothing to do with having armed resistance at the border. And I wanted to say something else, but I hope I remember what.
But no, push us back if you want. I mean, if there's something.
Sure.
Since I mean, I don't want to dominate too. If you
Look, like the thing is, and I feel, after observing this war unfolding, I feel Hezbollah can't go back to the way it was. But I don't see vocal opposition, or I don't see نقمة شعبية, that's the term, against Hezbollah. So let's recall a Christian example. The Christians, they fought each other during the civil war. The Auni and the Uwait. Okay. And the LF people consider Michel Aoun to be a crazy general that opened the front only to lose it and to lose all the region. And the others, the Aouni, called Samir Jaja a brutal criminal who assassinated all the Christian leaders. But I don't see that happening within the Shia community. After this brutal war and after this huge loss, you still feel this bonding, this communal bonding, and you also feel this religious and ideological aspect. When you see Afghanis telling you we're ready to fight in Lebanon, Iraqis, Fatimiyun, Zainabiyun, and all, like you feel that they have a support that goes beyond Lebanon. So I don't know how to explain it. So
they've surrendered to that.
And they tell you, and at the end of the day, they tell you, we are sacrificing, we are shedding blood. It's not your war, it's ours. And this is like absolutely insane, because we're all affected, we're all in the same boat. But this is their argument. And no, we are paying.
There's three things to go through. أول شيء, I mean, even if it's technically, yes, there were Christians killing each other during the Civil War. For better or worse, Michel Aoun was the commander-in-chief of the army too. And he was on his way to becoming a de facto president to a degree, a prime minister in Ba'abda. So that Amin al-Jmayl moment and those 2 years of real fighting, and Ashrafi too, that was a army against paramilitary sub-state group like the Lebanese forces. It was unusual, and it did happen, but I think it happened more in that context than just Christians killing each other. So that maybe is part of it. The second thing is that I think, if you just stretch out the timeline, using these sectarian ways of describing it, the Shia killed each other for years in the 80s. And that's the bloodiest chapter of the Civil War. It's Harb al-Mukhayyamat, it's Hezbollah against Amal. And there's blood. And the only group that effectively killed Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon, that's Lebanese, is Amal.
Yeah.
So that's also huge. So they did. They fought each other under Syrian occupation. Pro and anti-Syria meant those years also how Iran and Syria sought their role in Lebanon in the 80s. The third thing is that today there's no other organized group like Hezbollah.
Alternative. They're the dominant party in the Shia community.
I mean, you have some kids with guns in other parties, and you have maybe some sophisticated guns too. But there's nothing like Hezbollah. Even after the war, there's nothing like Hezbollah. And I think that maybe the examples don't matter right now, and that there's one sub-state group that was involved in this war. And they were hurt very, very much. They were disfigured. I don't think a Shia fight would happen naturally.
But not even in a vocal opposition. Not even a vocal opposition. We only saw a few online, very whispers here and there, but not to a point where they question, where they force the leadership, the Hezbollah leadership, to question their whole strategy. Like, how do you push? Like, what are what is the feedback mechanism of Hezbollah? It's supposed to be their people. If their people are just accepting everything, how do they expect to change or to evolve?
It's supposed to be. And maybe in windows of time, it was more that. The fact that Hassan Nasrallah opened Lebanon up to a war between Hamas and Israel says the opposite happened. This unity of arenas has very little to do with Lebanese interests or public opinion. Hassan Nasrallah, in his history, cannot be the guy who says this is a stupid decision for Hamas to do this, and less than a year later is killed, other than being Iran's front man. There's no Lebanese angle to this. He would be alive if it was more what you're describing. And you're right, public opinion in Lebanon, and this angle here, what is it now, 40 years of pretty much eliminating all Shia opponents to this group and keeping Harakat Amal in its current shape, I think is also part of the story. I mean, all these celebrated Shia intellectuals that are dead, and all these smaller groups, and Lebanese Shia are as complicated as any other group. They can throw rice at the Israelis when they're fed up with Palestinian resistance, too. And then their children can go fight the Israelis.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is very underreported. And the true sentiment of, the true connection between the Shia, for instance, of Baalbek and Palestine does not exist.
Yeah.
Unless it's ideological. So you've got two parts. From my observation, from my friendships, from my relationships, this is what I understood. That there is the community part. Okay, if the ideologues are supporting the Gaza, yes, sure, it's my community. I would support it, but truly, I wouldn't say this to you if we're sitting together. But on the camera, I would say something else.
Yeah, it seems we always reach a dead end when we talk about this. I don't know if we also have to look at the way, in a way, at the last generation, how the last generation of Hezbollah's constituency was groomed, I will say. It starts from a very young age. I know it's a very bleak thing to say, but I think there are things that are beyond repair. I think there are some levels of convictions that you reach in life that simply you will never change them, and no matter what happens to you, you're just going to find a way to twist that into into romanticizing it or accepting it as part of your cause or whatever. But I think we need to have a serious conversation about our values in this country, because I think we value not things that are just different, things that are opposed to each other. So, for example, If you ask me what does it mean to me to have a good standard of life, I will give you a very different answer than if you ask someone whose mission is to die. Yani, if death is the reward, then I don't think there's any kind of common ground for us to start to talk about.
This is something exactly ma. This rhetoric تبع ما بيشبهونا is also part why the Shia community would not let go of Hezbollah and its ideology because they think that we perceive them as ما بيشبهونا. So you're pushing them to the same corner instead of opening your arms and accepting them and trying to find a middle ground. Like, what do you say about that?
Okay, I wouldn't say that what I'm saying. I'm not intending to generalize. So, and I'm not talking about all the Shia community. And you don't have to be Shia to not value the same things I value. I know people who live a few kilometers away from me, and they share more in common with some fighters at the border. And I know some people who live on the border with Israel who ran away to come live with us and would probably still want to be here if they got the chance. So I don't think it has anything to do with sectarian identifications. Human psychology is much more universal, what I would say. So فيك تجيب حدا من الصين and put them in a similar situationship, and they would also get to similar conclusions.
If Hezbollah was a Lebanese militia, it would have been disarmed 30-some years ago. Because it's not a Lebanese militia. It is armed, and it has also taken a certain community, and it has made it reflect something that is less Lebanese. And even though culturally every single Lebanese citizen is complicated, even if they've been fighting for Hezbollah, I still think these are Lebanese citizens. They can be brought back, just the same way they can be thrown away too. And I think at the end of the day, what is happening in Syria right now shows a bit of this. The current de facto leader of Hezbollah is maybe dreaming of sending Hezbollah fighters into Syria. Good luck. Good luck trying to justify what was unpopular 15 years ago or so.
Yeah.
Which I think most Lebanese, even if they're pro-Hezbollah, even if they're Hezbollah fighters, I really did not respect the Syrian regime.
No.
Yeah, so going now, trying to save somebody who's...
I think they're trying to save their interests. I think they're trying to save their interests.
Yeah.
And in their defense, they would tell you, actually, we're gonna protect our religious, what do you call it? Like the spots, our religious spots. Let's call
It
that.
makes it about them, not about Assad.
Yeah, it's about them, and it's about protecting their interests from Iran to Iraq to Lebanon.
It will be the most unpopular battle after a very unpopular war that Hassan Nasrallah was killed in, and not Naim Qasim, even though I don't try to get too deep in what people think about him. I know he's a disrespected person and he's considered lousy. That's not going to be the guy to passionately rally anyone into Syria right now.
Maybe that's why he's still alive. Come in.
But I'll say something else. Yes, you can always justify bad ideas. Doesn't mean they should happen. You can justify many bad decisions.
Yeah.
On a level that does not destroy what I think should be preserved, with or without Israel living next to us. I do believe Lebanon matters more. For me, Lebanon matters. It is older than Israel, and it should outlive Israel if Israel is to one day turn into something else. Lebanon is worth saving.
Totally. One more question, maybe. Some people would say it's a positive thing to have one party that is funded by a foreign entity, as opposed to the whole Lebanese state, in under one banner and one unified, because Israel would then bomb all of Lebanon instead of just focusing on this one entity. And also there's it's something positive to have an ideology fighting, because no one else is willing to die for the country. Only ideologues.
Maybe no one has to.
I think you're...
Maybe the answer is no one has to. Maybe the answer is not we should have a group that is funded by another country so that only that group takes the punches. Maybe the lesson to extract from this is only that group takes the punches because it's throwing the punches. And maybe if no one throws the first punch, nobody would take the punch, the final punch. يعني I don't understand how these people come to that conclusion, which should be يعني يعني you said something I'm gonna هيك شوي peel it back. قلت أنت إنه العبرة لازم تكون إنه في مجموعة واحدة لازم تكون روج برات الستيت، هيدي المجموعة بس تاكل قتلة. العبرة مش إنه بس هيدي المجموعة تاكل قتلة، العبرة إنه اللي
ما تاكل قتلة أبدا،
ما بياكل قتلة.
ايه بس هي الفكرة
Why do we
شو
always
اللوجيك
assume
اللوجيك
القتلة
انه
شيء؟
اللوجيك هو انه if Israel is a colonial expansionist entity
Okay.
and they have aspirations in Lebanon, if you want to fight this entity and you know that America is supporting it, knowing like you're fully aware that America is willing to go above and beyond and to support Israel with weapons, money, and even letting, you know, on the expense of its soft power. Okay? Then, if you want to fight Israel as a state, your situation would become like Iran. Iran is blacklisted. There's a lot of هذا عقوبات عليها. So this is why there's a need for
is
a
Iran
rogue
the only
group.
is Iran the only model in the Middle East? Is it only either Iran or Israel?
But to push back against the resistance emphasis thing, it's I don't think it's our right to judge how Palestinians respond. So whether they're Palestinians in Gaza or the West Bank, or for that matter, Palestinians with Israeli citizenship that don't want war, I can't judge them too. The Palestinians in Akka, that are half the population of that city, or the Palestinians that live in Haifa,
2 million Palestinian Israelis
that are Israeli citizens or residents, the ones in East Jerusalem, right? And also the Palestinians in the diaspora, or the ones that are literally fighting on the front line. I don't think it's possible for us to judge how they respond to that, because within the British mandate of Palestine, yes, Israel doubled its size from what should have been 50% or so into de facto control of the whole territory. So that expansionism happened. Even when the UN partitioned half the area, the Jewish majority state took control of the rest. That's been colonialistic, whatever the word is, colonial and expansionist, not in Lebanon. So it doesn't work here. The reasons don't add up on our side of the border. Maybe they add up in multitude of ways on the other side. But again, I don't want to judge how Palestinians react. I also can't justify or even sell the argument that they should not resist. This includes, by the way, the peace-oriented crowd that spent decades trying to figure out a two-state solution that almost took hold. I can't judge those Palestinians for wanting to make peace with a dominant actor to move on. But on Lebanon, no, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Sorry. What did you?
No, I think okay. So أنت عم تقول لي, can you repeat your?
So the idea of having a rogue element in Lebanon,
so that it can absorb.
It can absorb and it can save Lebanon from sanctions or from you know, all the beating.
Okay, is Lebanon the way we know it now working?
No.
No, thank you. يعني what is the if Lebanon was working with Hezbollah, then that's a solid argument. If it takes Hezbollah to somehow tip the scales and somehow some magical way get us the opposite result of what logic says, fine. I would have been, you know what, it's working and I'm gonna go club in Beirut and do whatever you want in Jnoub. But it's not working, and it's not just them suffering the consequence. Even if they are the ones who are willing to accept it, that does not mean they have enough legitimacy to enforce it on everyone else. So the answer is simple: is Lebanon working? If that's how you define Lebanon working, that's the ceiling for Lebanon in your mind, then I know we can do much better. And if you're going to always assume إنه القتل جاي no matter what, then you're bringing it onto yourself. You in any calculus القتل جاي, in any calculus we're gonna go to war. I might be wrong on this, but correct me if I'm wrong. Has there been any time in history where Israel was able to expand without war? Without war that was started on its behalf. So if war is the momentum for Israeli expansion, maybe you should stop giving them war. If every time Israel goes to war, wins and ends up being bigger, and every time we go to war with Israel, they destroy South Lebanon, they reach Beirut, they bomb the shit out of the country, they push us back 20 years later. If that's how they win,
No, but
maybe
I
we
mean
should deny them.
they're annexing the West Bank
Sure.
without war.
بس نحن بس
Quote unquote.
بس the one time Israel actually became much bigger than what the UN allowed it was following a war.
Yeah.
Every time war precedes every time war is what precedes Israeli expansion. So war gives them the upper hand. It's their momentum. Stop giving them war. If you want Israel to stop expanding, stop giving it war. But if you're gonna invite Israel to a ring, it's gonna win. It's more powerful than you. So that's their momentum.
There is an example of the contrary. In 1973, the Arab-Israeli war forced the Israelis to leave the Sinai. So in exchange for relations.
But it was not the war, it was an agreement. Because in the last days of the battle,
Yeah.
It was the war
the
that got
Egyptians
the-
were not doing good.
Yeah, and then in it took time for the peace deal to go
But
through.
how did they get to this?
And by the way, this
From
agreement, this treaty
Yeah.
was remains secret for 15 years.
Yeah.
By the way, like هلا طالما عم ينحكى عن the annex to the ceasefire deal that remains classified.
But peace or war, I don't know if that's really the story too. Lebanon has not suffered and suffered with Israel next door. I don't know if Lebanon has suffered when there's been no resistance, quote unquote, at the border. I see it as the opposite. I think that's the model. Don't put a paramilitary group that is sponsored by another country, or for that matter, is entirely another cause, like Fatah. Don't put that on the Lebanese border with Israel. We don't deserve it. The Lebanese South pays the ultimate price at the end. That's the story. And then the groups that are able to pervert politics win long term. Especially a group like Hezbollah doesn't reflect anything that's Lebanese. Even with Hezbollah fighters being Lebanese, there's nothing Lebanese about this militia. What decent Lebanese militia would go to
It's a mix.
survive?
I think it's a mix. It's a mix between, they're rooted in that land, but also they do their pilgrimage in Syria and Iraq and Iran, and they belong to this big nation project, which is Wilayat al-Faqih. So I think there's a mix.
The most Syrian group in Lebanon is the SSNP. Maybe they don't like Assad because Assad doesn't like them in Syria.
It's a toxic relationship. It's a love and hate relationship.
But in Syria, I think the group is actually... The Assad regime doesn't like much except itself. But the SSNP is not going to fight on behalf of Assad in Syria. Find me one drunk kid that's still in Hamra that's going to go fight in Halab right now. None. Let alone Hezbollah fighters today. It's unlikely. So I don't know if that's the reason too. I think Hezbollah in its inception, even though Lebanese like to feel like it's part of the liberation of the South, and they've attached liberation to that group. Hezbollah is a small operation in the 1980s. Hezbollah kidnaps people. Hezbollah blows up embassies and blows up Marine barracks, the US and French. Hezbollah goes to South America. It's sophisticated in what it does. It is in the drugs trade. It's in money laundering. It's in everything that Lebanese groups are not able to do. That's not Lebanon. That's a international terrorist network. Can be made up of not just Lebanese too. If it doesn't need to be, it can be bigger. But it's not. At the end of the day, it's Iran's front line. So I think that's the story. Liberation. The Hezbollah fighters that killed Israelis in the south, yes, they participated in pressuring the Israelis to no longer occupy the south. But liberation in itself, I don't think Hezbollah deserves that credit too. I think it is a very small, very organized Iranian front line. And it got too big. And it got out of control. And then suddenly it's the only group we've been talking about for 20 years.
Can I add something?
Let's just take a comment on this. And I give them the credit of participating in liberation. Of course, this decision of evacuating or withdrawing from south of Lebanon was not purely based on military. It was a bigger decision that includes geopolitics and dynamics of the region. But I give them the credit. But my problem with Hezbollah started, the Khoure تبعنا, the priest of our village in Nabati in Kfur, was kidnapped and killed by Hezbollah. But then they apologized after, what was his name? بعدين صار 14 مارش هذا الزلمة شو اسمه؟ طفيلي. الطفيلي.
Okay.
So my problem with Hezbollah كانت in the 2000s. Okay, صار liberation and what are we doing? بقيت مزارع شبعة. بعدين وصل الارجيومنت تبع انه في اطماع like في aspirations وهيك.
Many Lebanese participated in getting the Israelis to get out,
Yeah.
including Hezbollah fighters. But this, giving them too much credit, may have also given them something that they don't deserve, which is this
Legitimacy.
righteousness. No, more than legitimacy, it's almost like there's something spiritual about this group. It transcends us. I don't think that's true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ralph, I want to comment on the conversation whether this group is Lebanese or not. I think when just look at their name, and when someone tells you who they are, believe them. They're not called the Lebanese Islamic Resistance. They're not called the Islamic Resistance.
In Lebanon.
They're called the Islamic Resistance in Lebanon.
No, I totally
They're not the
agree.
Lebanese
Yeah.
resistance. Lebanon is just the vessel, and it's just the base of operations. That's what they call themselves. Okay? It takes more than just to be born in this country to be Lebanese, I think. ما عم بحكي about political rights. Of course, if you're born in this country, you're Lebanese, you get to vote. But we're talking about ideas and causes. It takes more than their fighters to be Lebanese for them to be considered Lebanese. First of all, they have to start to consider themselves Lebanese, and that starts with a change of behavior, but also a small change in name, for example.
No, but it goes back to it goes back. Not changing names, you can't do
That's
that.
too ambitious, George.
لا بس انه if they really want to become Lebanese, ما اسمك بلبنان، اسمك لبنان. في فرق كتير كبير linguistically in
The
that.
most state-oriented group at the moment, we can always disagree on this, is the Lebanese forces. And they're not the Lebanese forces, but they'll never change their name too.
Right.
They're going to always be that militia,
Yeah.
paramilitary,
Good
Bashir.
point.
They'll always be Uwait Lebanese.
Good point.
Hezbollah will always be Hezbollah. But I wanted to suggest something, and now I forgot. I had a point, which is it'll come back to
It happened to me a few times.
it was something very important.
No, but the point I was making about the name is not, I don't actually want them to change the name. I don't think they will, but I think it's in the name. The answer to your question is in the name.
يا اخي ايه بس ما هي الفكره انه في the religious aspect وفي the paramilitary.
What is the dominant
The
aspect?
religious aspect هو بيربطك ب this broader project. بس المشكل فيه انه it has a military objective.
بس ما sorry بس the military aspect is also bound to something bigger.
Exactly.
It's not localized only in Lebanon.
It goes back
Sure.
to your original point. If your main cause is the destruction of Israel, Hezbollah is whatever you want it to be. A Lebanese group, a Lebanese militia, a force of good, a force of resistance, a moral group, anti-corruption, the savior. Hassan Nasrallah can be Che Guevara too. If you really believe that the point is to destroy Israel, you can say many things about Hezbollah. If your dedication is not that, if it's to save Lebanon from any problem, including not Israelis in Lebanon, you don't want the Israelis here, then Hezbollah becomes not so much all of those things. It becomes less that. It really becomes more an Iranian-sponsored group. And remove the money, remove the weapons, remove the support. I don't think Hezbollah is that important. Add all of that, and you have a really deadly force.
Okay, one last question for both of you. How do we move from here? We've had this war. I think we've had enough of wars and destruction. How do we move from here?
I think this conversation should be a lot simpler and easier to have. I'm not happy about what we spent an hour and 10 minutes doing, which is trying to prove the obvious. It's exhausting, it's humiliating.
No, I mean, those are, valuable
No,
concerns.
of course, they're
That
concerns,
needs to
but,
be
but
addressed,
they've
especially
become
for-
so crippling. They've become. ما قصدي I don't like that we ended I don't like that we have to do this, and I also don't like that none of this is going to matter. I'm really
No,
sorry.
that's
I'm
not
gonna
true.
offer a
That's not true.
pessimistic
That's
outlook.
not true.
But I
You
feel
have to
like
prove him wrong. If it mattered, please
please
text.
sign a petition not to war.
I think I subscribe to Ralph's view that these things do stick in people's minds. No, I think it does matter.
I hope so.
Besides, I'll let you keep going. Sorry.
I hope so. I've ran out of things to say, and I think all of us over the past year have been just reinventing ways to say the same things, and we hear back the same counter arguments. I do sense a shift in public opinion. I feel like I've talked about this. I feel like the what we call the movable middle up until September, mid-September, October really shifted إنه لا okay maybe ما كنا قد لهالخبرية, maybe ما في توازن راب, but that's not the core audience. That's observers who are trying to give it a chance because this choice was made on their behalf. They had no say in whether or not it happened, so they felt maybe we can have some control in how we frame it. They were like, okay, maybe مش لأنه. But I don't know if that is transformative enough to really to really change the relationship between Hezbollah and its constituencies, unless there's a very strong alternative that can emerge that can give them something better. One thing I'm interested to see is how the relationship between the Lebanese state and the people in the south will change now that the Lebanese army is there and Hezbollah isn't. If Hezbollah will actually ينسحب. So I think that's a big strategic loss for Hezbollah. No, it's no longer the middleman between the state and the people. But how do we move from here? I think this is bigger than us. This is not a local issue that we can vote on or that we can protest for. I think sadly we have to just hope that what we want, our interests, are going to some point intersect with interests of greater forces that can actually do something about it. But I don't think we can do anything about it.
Well,
Interesting.
I will answer your question, but I don't want it to be the last one. Okay, so I want another question after, and we can share it if you want. Or maybe I'll ask you a question.
Interesting.
No. There's always going to be many reasons to believe in many things that feel correct. And especially in a country that's been a war zone for a long time, there's going to be a lot of warlike reasons to fight. So, Hezbollah, اليوم, but long ago it wasn't Hezbollah, and it may not be Hezbollah later. The Israel threat, make it worse. Let's say it's something you can imagine that's even more vicious than Israel. It's still not a reason to expose Lebanon to war. That's not in our interest. The solution in my mind has been the solution that worked earlier in Lebanon's history. And I've made this example several times. We've been exposed to regional war before. And we came out of it okay too in the past. Even after Fuad Shib. And the war everyone still talks about to this day, 1967. I think it's an important lesson. The Lebanese army was in the south. There's no UNIFIL. There's no Fatah.
Right.
There's the Lebanese army, which is a smaller army than it is today. So it's a smaller, more affordable Lebanese army that's on the border with Israel. And in this extreme war, every country in the region paid a price, except Lebanon. That's an important reminder. We don't need to be the front line for regional war. We can also be neutral. Now, this word, neutral, assumes that we're ignoring Israeli crimes or that we're choosing sides by not being against Israel. Neutral is not that. Neutral is neutralizing Lebanon from war. You can support Palestine as much as you want. You can even help, not in ways that hurt Lebanon. And I think we've done better at cultural support. And also, we've done better at diplomacy. Lebanon could be the spearheading voice for an Arab-Israeli solution and a just Palestinian state. We could be doing that. It doesn't have to be the Saudis. It doesn't have to be any other country. In the old days, it was Saddam, and then Qaddafi became the binational voice. He called it Isratin, that crazy man in Libya. We don't need those idiots. We could be the shining star. And we had the capital to do that too. Now, neutralization also should be the way to save us from war. And there's a voice in this country that's not fringe, it's actually more mainstream, that says that the Lebanese army cannot defend us from Israel. Whether it's peace or war, the Lebanese army is designed not to defend us from Israel, or that the American support for the Lebanese army conditions no offensive weapons or serious defensive weapons. The Lebanese army in the 1960s was weaker and smaller. We were spared war. I think that's the story. It's that if you're not opening your borders to regional war, you don't have to overspend on anything. And if we deem it necessary, we could have deals with any country we want. At the end of the day, this is an independent state. But you don't need to throw all your money away hoping to catch up with the Israelis on military expenditure. None of the countries in the region can. Even the ones that have made deals recently could never fight a war against Israel. And I bet you that even if we overspent on our military defenses or offense weapons, the Israelis would always be able to destroy.
Yeah.
So I think that's a money drain, and it's a stupid take. And it does something which is deliberate. It's meant to force Lebanon to remain the front line for existential war, whether it's Iran or whether it's Palestine. So I think that whole argument doesn't work. And that's where resistance in the not Hezbollah crowd, not Hezbollah, in the Hezbollah support system, I think they lean on that argument to make it a permanent war. I think it's foolish, but that's my 2 cents. Now, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, sure.
When you're confronted by ideas that bother you, whether it's this issue or otherwise, do you find it easy to have a winning argument up in your pocket that you sort of take out? No.
Especially online, because you don't know the people. You don't know their context. You don't know if they're Lebanese, they're Lebanese diaspora, living in Europe or the US. It's all different crowds with different backgrounds and mentalities. So
it depends on the audience.
Depends on the audience. I always ask, like, tell me more about you. Like, let me guess. Are you where do you live? Without knowing the context, you can't explain.
My last few months, the crowd that I was finding it hardest to reason with was the Western intelligentsia that felt that it was weird we're not all supporting Hezbollah.
Mm-hmm.
And words like, how can you not be afraid of the genocidal army at your border? Don't you know they want to expand? It's coming from Western audience, which means something did happen, which is the resistance propaganda machine infected a certain
press.
Mint press affected a crowd that is well-intentioned abroad. I think they're well-intentioned. They're not like assholes. They don't hate us. They actually want us to be safe. They bought
sexy, Ronnie.
But they bought into the narrative that
Gaza has the power. Like anyone, Iranian strategy of using Gaza to advance its own agenda has worked among the Western audience, and you see that happening right now. You see that manifesting right now with in the conversations around the Syrian revolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
You see them. Yeah. You see the West that was supporting Gaza now saying that how could you support those Israeli-backed rebels?
Yeah. صار لي global بعض إسرائيل.
Israeli-backed rebels.
And
even.
they are also to blame for this.
Zionist backed rebels.
They are also to blame the Israelis for this, because they didn't take any consequence other than their own into consideration.
Exactly.
Let the world burn so long as we get what we want.
Exactly. They destroyed everything.
They destroyed the moral system that the liberal democracies govern the world on, supposedly.
And resistance, if it's literally what it is today, which is Hezbollah, turned Israel into the big boss, the police force that dictates the threats on the ground, rather than us preventing threats from emerging in the country to begin with. They've become the de facto security force. That's a terrible situation for Lebanon. That is a violation of our role. Beyond sovereignty, it's our dignity. And that is the consequence of resistance. And I think it's not understood right.
And I think what Israel just did is gonna, I hope that's not gonna be the case, but destroying, stepping on the values, democratic values, and the system, ignoring the ICC, ignoring
Catalyst.
it's a catalyst for chaos and the rule of the strong man.
Authoritarian
rule,
propaganda.
authoritarian.
But
rule.
I think I do think that مثلا what the ICJ just did, the ICC is reclaiming a lot of the lost legitimacy and issuing arrest warrants for Netanyahu, seeing the British government says we will arrest him, the Spanish says we will arrest him. I think crisis management in the medium term is still possible. It's still easy to reclaim the moral high ground. I think personally, and I've said this to Ronnie, بتحس انه البروباغندا ماشيين من المضادة اللي طلعت بوجهك كتير قوي. يعني
هي المشكلة انه في عندك اسرائيل خرب وغلطت كتير وهذاك استفاد كتير من الغلطة تبعها وهو منه احسن منها يعني.
I don't know how this is reversible, if it is reversible. What I do think will happen is that after Israel finishes its security objectives, we're going to see a regime change in Israel. We're going to start seeing the West being a lot more hard on Israel now that it's done securing its objectives in an attempt to reclaim the moral high ground that they lost. I think the last person who will fall in this chain will be Netanyahu. So they will all be gone, and after he is done, رح يقولوا له, okay, we've been tolerating you for 2 years. Now it's time for you to step aside, or now is the time where we allow you to be to suffer the consequences. I think it has to end with Netanyahu falling, because that's the only way Israel can say, okay, maybe we can produce something better for the world, and it's the only way the West can say we can hold them accountable, even though now that they're done, we can hold them accountable. And it's حتى the Israeli opposition, they've been fierce opposition, but did anyone actually want to govern in the middle of a war? No, they all want him to be done. Nobody wants to inherit a crisis.
Lebanese had the right to fight Syrian soldiers in Lebanon, and they did. The wars that we talked about earlier, Ben, Lebanese forces and Michel Aoun, their shared fight was against the Syrian army. It's a justified reaction. Lebanese had every right to fight the Israelis too as they entered the country, and that is resistance. And you can maybe not see it as something that benefits us, but at least it's resistance. You're resisting a foreign army. In May 2000, and you said it earlier, this little zone, Shaba, it's not resistance. And 24 years later, it's not resistance. And a Golan Lebanese border is not resistance. A disputed little part is just not resistance. So the justification is thrown away. But I remember going to the south on the border just after the Israelis withdrew, and the Hezbollah flag was almost considered, I wouldn't say it's positive, but it was okay. It was accepted that, yeah, they played a fundamental role.
Yeah.
And it didn't, unless you were in the South Lebanese army, or maybe a villager that was naturally opposed to them for other reasons too, it didn't carry the same weight as it does today, because that was the end of the resistance. That became a clearly problematic problem, a huge one that we paid a huge price for. Don't forget that there's not going to be a port blast anymore, port blast investigation.
There's no need.
Most of the people that would have been indirectly involved,
They're gone.
They're dead. These assassinations that took place, other than the special tribunal, look, man, you don't need to worry anymore about going after those criminals. They're dead. It's a long time, and I think that's the price we will not really appreciate until later. That this country served as the Iranian battlefield. Put Iranian soldiers in place of Hezbollah, we would have resisted against Iran.
Yeah, totally.